Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, GOP lawmakers are calling for answers from Facebook and Twitter over both platforms limiting the reach of a New York Post article about Hunter Biden. South Dakota Senator John Thune discusses the criticism surrounding these companies' content moderation decisions and the issue of health care. And with 18 days until Election Day, most national polls continue to show former Vice President Joe Biden leading President Trump, and state polls have him ahead in key battleground states like Arizona and Florida. Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace shares his insight on the chances of the president achieving a comeback and how the coronavirus pandemic could impact the race. Plus commentary by Jimmy Failla, host of Fox Across America. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Abby Hornacek.
This is Tucker Carlson.
And I'm Jessica Tarlov. This is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, October 16th, 2020. I'm Lisa Brady. As the presidential campaigns barrel toward the finish line, a fierce fight also continues for control of the U.S. Senate.
It's critically important as well in all of these states where we have competitive Senate races that people turn out and make their voices heard and let the Republicans continue to control the United States Senate.
I'm Chris Foster. Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace says about what's left of the presidential race.
I don't know who's going to win the election, but I would say at this point, if you said to me, who would you rather be? Would you rather be the Trump campaign manager or the Biden campaign manager? At this moment, I'd rather be the Biden campaign manager.
And I'm Jimmy Failla. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Since winning his personal bout with coronavirus, President Trump's been back on the campaign trail with a vengeance. Chance of 4 more years in Greenville, North Carolina Thursday, his 4th rally in 4 days, as he continues to dismiss polls showing Joe Biden in the lead. While on Capitol Hill,
the motion is not agreed to.
The Senate Judiciary Committee, along party lines, rejecting a Democrat proposal to delay a vote on Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett. The committee is now scheduled to vote next Thursday on sending her nomination to the Senate floor, a customary 1-week layover after confirmation hearings that leaves plenty of time to meet the president's goal of having Barrett on the court before Election Day.
I think both sides are going to be very motivated in this election, and I think the Supreme Court only probably further intensifies that motivation.
South Dakota Senator John Thune is not up for re-election this year. He's the number 2 Republican in the Senate, the majority whip.
The Supreme Court nomination typically brings out high intensity on both sides. The question is, what do those voters in the middle think about all this? And how are they going to be persuaded, having watched the process now for the past several days? And my view is it's going to help with Republicans. I think that, the judge did a terrific job. I think she acquitted herself extremely well, proved how qualified she is. And if anybody was watching those hearings, they had to walk away from it with that conclusion. That being said, we've got a ways to go to get her through the, final vote in the Senate. But it seems to me, at least anyway, that when you're talking about a Supreme Court nomination as qualified as Amy Coney Barrett, that certainly is helpful to Republicans politically. And I suspect that come Election Day, if people are thinking about the Supreme Court, if they're thinking about the judicial process and what they want to see on the court, that's going to incline them to favor Republicans when it comes to how they vote in the election.
What about the issue of health care, though? It was a big issue in the 2018 midterm elections for Democrats. It dominated much of Judge Barrett's hearings. What could happen if the Supreme Court essentially throws out Obamacare? Is that issue an election vulnerability for Republicans?
I think that the Democrats believe that it is, obviously, because they're running an awful lot of ads. They're spending enormous amounts of money, millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars attacking Republicans on that issue. But the fact of the matter is our candidates, at least our Senate candidates around the country, have a really good response. I mean, our members are all in favor of preserving protections for pre-existing conditions. And I think the Supreme Court nomination was an opportunity for Democrats to attack the nominee on the issue of what she might do hypothetically if the Affordable Care Act, if she's on the court when it's considered. But I thought she answered it really well. And I think she's she's a judge who is going to apply the law and the Constitution in an impartial way and not try and legislate preordained outcomes or results. And what Democrats typically want in a judge is somebody who will almost act as an auxiliary legislator who will help them get the results and outcomes that they haven't been able to get through the political branches of our government. And so I think this is this experience that we've had watching her respond to these questions, although the Democrats tried as hard as they could to badger her on a potential hypothetical, I thought she answered it really well. And I think it's very clear that whatever happens with the Supreme Court on Obamacare, Republicans are committed to making sure that we have protections for pre-existing conditions and alternatives in place that would be a much better solution for the American people than the Obamacare bill, which is frankly has driven up premiums and out-of-pocket costs, deductibles, and everything else for most Americans.
Just one more question about the healthcare issue, though, because Democrats are always saying, well, Republicans haven't yet put forth a comprehensive alternative to Obamacare. Do you think that's necessary? Is that a question that sort of hangs over this, especially for Republicans who are out there trying to hold on to the Senate this year?
Yeah, I think that the bigger issue really when it comes to health care is what a lot of the Democrats, including those, a lot of them in the running for elective office in the congressional level, but certainly it's been a subject of conversation during the Democrat nomination process for president, is, going to a single payer national health care system, which would take away the coverage that the hundreds of millions, tens of millions, and actually about 160 million Americans currently get through their employer. And many of them are very happy with that insurance. And so I think the issue of health care and health coverage, insurance coverage, cuts both ways. The Democrats obviously try and point to the shortcomings in a Republican position on this particular aspect of it or that. But I think for most Americans, it's really about what does it cost? What is my coverage? Do I have access to quality care? And is it an affordable price? The healthcare issue is one that Democrats see as something that has political advantage for them. But when it comes to actually providing solutions for the American people, I think the Republican approach, a free market approach that allows them to keep the coverage that they like, provides those for, Medicare, Medicaid, others who need coverage, provides protections for those as well, but in the end gives them options that create a competitive environment where they're getting lower prices and better care.
The president keeps hammering Joe Biden over allegations of potentially inappropriate behavior connected to his son's business dealings while he was vice president. Is that something you think the Senate should spend time holding hearings on?
I would say it's probably something that the relevant committee chairman, if they choose to, certainly could look at. I mean, I think there is enough there. There's enough smoke there. Certainly there could be some fire. But I think in terms of, the timing and the schedule, what we're looking at between now and the election, at least in the Senate, we have the Barrett nomination. We'll try and move that across the floor. We do have some hearings scheduled for next week in the Senate, where we will actually have, or I should say the following week in the Senate, where we'll actually have the heads of the big three tech companies, Google and Facebook and Twitter, in front of Congress. And I think that'll be an interesting hearing as well. But to the degree that the time allows for it and that the relevant committee chairs think there's information there that needs to be made available to the American people, needs to be delved into a little bit more deeply, I certainly wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen.
Well, some of your colleagues are now accusing some of the social media companies of election interference because of their moves to restrict the latest reporting about possible Hunter Biden emails, for instance, and there's talk of subpoenas in that regard. That could be another round of hearings with some of these social media executives. Is that, a road that you'd maybe rather go down, or do you think that's going too far to call it election interference?
Well, I think that the question is a fair one and needs to be posed of these tech companies. And frankly, should they be the final arbiters of what the truth is? And they have enormous ability and frankly monopoly power when it comes to suppressing or amplifying what we see on social media platforms. So we did have to subpoena. We voted to subpoena in the Commerce Committee, Google, Twitter, and Facebook, and they are coming in now voluntarily. The threat of a subpoena evidently was enough to get them to come. So they're going to come in front of the Commerce Committee. The Judiciary Committee, as you point out, also now is subpoenaing those same companies. But I think this is an issue that needs to be looked at. And frankly, if you're going to have the protections that they have under the law when it comes to liability, you can't be out there arguing that you're a neutral platform and at the same time be a publisher. In other words, moderating the content that goes on to your platform. And that's the question that's really we're trying to answer here is how do we make sure that these tech companies are operating in a way that is transparent, where they're held accountable to the American people, and where their content moderation policies are not censoring conservative or any other type of content for that matter.
Joe Biden has denied any wrongdoing as vice president. As for the social media restrictions on the latest allegations, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey says his company should do a better job of explaining why when it decides to block something. One thing that keeps hitting a roadblock in Washington, another stimulus bill. President Trump telling Fox Business Thursday he's prepared to go even bigger.
I think there's a chance. I do, because I think there's a lot of pressure on Pelosi.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has continued talks with Treasury Chief Steve Mnuchin, but the gap remains between the latest plan from House Democrats, over $2 trillion, and a White House proposal of $1.8 trillion, which Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says is too high for Senate Republicans. He's preparing to put a $500 billion package to a vote.
We voted on a bill in the United States Senate a couple of weeks ago that we had 52 Republican senators out of 53 vote for. It was a very balanced bill. It was very targeted. It was fiscally responsible. It had a price tag of about $650 billion. And of course, what the Democrats in the House are talking about is several $1 trillion on top of the $3.5 or so trillion that we've already spent, all of which, by the way, was borrowed money. And I think any decision that we make going forward, we need to be very aware of the impact we're going to have on our children's future if we continue to pile up more and more debt. And the resources that we put on this problem, and there are issues out there that need to be addressed, and we're going to have to do more. We know that. But we can't just yield to every demand the Democrats make right now. For now, it looks like we're a little bit at odds. But I think after we get the election behind us, hopefully, and the dust settles and the smoke clears, we can come together and do some things that are meaningful, but that are targeted, are fiscally responsible, and aren't just literally piling trillions and trillions of more debt on the backs of our children and grandchildren.
One last thing, Senator. Here we are less than 3 weeks to Election Day now, millions already voting. How concerned are you about Republicans possibly losing control of the Senate this year?
Well, we've got a lot of competitive races. We know that. There are right now, they're just as tight as can be out there, and unbelievable amounts of money being spent. I mean, I can't even tell you how stunning it is. The amount of money, and our candidates in all of these competitive races are going to be outspent by their Democratic opponents because there is so much Democrat money flowing into these states this year. But even with that, we've got some really good, strong candidates who are running good campaigns, are good fits for their state. And it's a bad political environment this year overall, at least right now. But I think even with some of these headwinds, that we have the quality of candidates with the right resources, although they're going to be outspent, and the right message that I think can come across the finish line and save the majority for us in the Senate. And the reason that's important to the American people is, irrespective of what happens at the presidential race, the United States Senate literally is the firewall against a really radical Democrat agenda. So I hope as people around the country, when they go to vote this year, we want to win the presidential race, but it's critically important as well in all of these states where we have competitive Senate races that people turn out and make their voices heard, and let the Republicans continue to control the United States Senate.
Senate Majority Whip John Thune, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thanks, Lisa. Nice to be with you.
This is Jimmy Failla with your Fox News commentary coming up.
We were supposed to have been talking about President Trump and Joe Biden's second debate last night. That was called off when the president refused to do it remotely, a change organizers wanted because of his coronavirus infection. He says that's over with, but instead of a debate, we get separate televised town halls with President Trump hosted by NBC News in Miami.
My question to you is, how are you going to get the United States back on track, both in terms of the economy and the pandemic?
So it's happening. We just set a record, 11.4 million jobs. We are going to have a phenomenal third quarter, which will be announced on November 1st, just prior to the big November 3rd day, where I think you're going to see a red wave. But we're going to have a tremendous announcement, I believe. I mean, we're going to find out. But GDP is going through the roof. Jobs, real estate, houses, so many things are happening.
And Joe Biden in a town hall moderated by ABC News' George Stephanopoulos in Philadelphia.
You stated that anyone making less than $400,000 will not see one single penny of their taxes raised.
That's right.
But also state that you are going to eliminate the Trump tax cuts. The Trump tax cuts reduces taxes for the majority of workers. I would argue not enough. What is your plan for either extending the tax cuts for the middle class or creating a new plan that further reduces those taxes?
I carry this card with me. When I said the Trump tax cuts, about $1.3 trillion of the $2 trillion in his tax cuts went to the top 1/10 of 1%. That's what I'm talking about eliminating, not all the tax cuts that are out there.
His vice presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, canceled her campaign travel through at least Sunday because of coronavirus cases in people on her team. The Democrats maintain their lead in presidential polls nationwide and in many states won by President Trump in 2016. Also raising a record amount of cash last month, $383 million.
Joe Biden has a lead now, and I do think he has a lot of advantages.
Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday.
It seems that the Trump campaign has a money crunch. I mean, they're dark and local TV in Iowa and Ohio, and they're pulling ads. I think they pulled, last Sunday it was a stat we didn't get to on the show, that they had pulled $20 million worth of ads out of the upper Midwest, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio, Iowa, and moved $20 million into the Sun Belt. That's not good because that's playing defense. That's protecting places that you won 4 years ago rather than playing offense and trying to win things. So, look, I don't know who's going to win the election, but I would say at this point, if you said to me, who would you rather be? Would you rather be the Trump campaign manager or the Biden campaign manager? At this moment, I'd rather be the Biden campaign manager.
Well, the Biden campaign manager says they think the election is going to be a lot closer than those polls. That could just be also something you say to stave off complacency, which may have hurt Hillary a little bit last time. And
push turnout, absolutely. I mean, it may be true, and you certainly, after what happened 4 years ago, don't want to be spiking the football before you get in the end zone. But, you know, I take that, a lot of that is we've got to still get out. We've got to get our votes out, early voting, mail-in voting, and Election Day voting.
This time 4 years ago, the Donald Trump Access Hollywood tape had just come out, like a week before, and that looked to be hurting him. And then James Comey, FBI director, on October 29th, announced the resumption of the Hillary Clinton email investigation, and that may have swung things a bit. Voters just seem to be less elastic this time around. I don't know what it could possibly be.
No, except turnout. You know, it may be the one thing that I think, and this was certainly true, not an outside event, but a hidden vote, a vote that doesn't show up in the polls. You know, we know that there is a tremendous line of people. I have to say, it's quite inspiring to see these people waiting 7 hours to vote. I don't think there's anything I would wait 7 hours for. But waiting out in the cold or the heat or whatever for 7 hours to vote in Virginia and Georgia and a bunch of other states, we don't know. Are they voting for Trump or are they voting for Biden? And I agree with you that what's so fascinating is that there have been so many huge events in this campaign, whether it's COVID, whether it's the economic collapse and now rebirth, whether it was a very unusual first debate, the president getting COVID. But, you know, the polls have stayed remarkably stable, and Biden has maintained, somewhere from a 7 to 11 point lead really since March. So That's one thing that would seem to indicate that that's where things are going. But, you just don't know if there's a hidden Trump vote, and it'll come out. And, I got egg on my face last time. I'm mixing my, my humble pie metaphors here. I'm not getting egg on my face this time. I am an absolute agnostic as to who's going to win the election. My only hope, Chris, is that there's a clear winner on election night, and, we can put this behind us. The country will have decided we got a new president. If you like him, great. If you don't like him, deal with it, get over it, and let's move on with our lives.
This New York Post Hunter Biden story about files from a computer, what do you make of the story, A? And B, what do you make about its being blocked for sharing on Facebook and Twitter? I
think the story is very sketchy. Not saying it's not true, but it seems to me it needs a lot of investigation. The guy who ran the computer store is supposedly legally blind. He's not sure who even came in with the computers. He says that, although the story keeps changing, that he gave it to the FBI last December, but, they're not confirming that. Now he's saying that he gave it to Rudy Giuliani's lawyer. Rudy Giuliani is not the most independent source on all this stuff. So I think it's absolutely worth investigating, but I'm not sure I'd even go with it at this point. But as far as Facebook and Twitter banning it, I got a real problem with that. I think you're either in or you're out. And when I say that, either it's the Wild West and you post everything, and I can understand the concern about that after what happened in 2016 with Russian disinformation, or you put everything out there. And if you have a problem with some of it, like, for instance, this story, which I do think is sketchy, then put a word on there to your users and say, we can't confirm this story, or, there's some questions with this story. But to just ban it and to say nobody is allowed to discuss this story or post this story, which, is out there. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. It was the front page of the New York Post. It really strikes me as smacking a big brother.
Yeah, and it's one of those, the Streisand Effect, that principle that if you there was a negative story about Barbara Streisand years ago. She brought publicity to it. Otherwise, nobody would have known about it. There's a little bit of that here. There's a little bit of that here where if the story hadn't been banned, fewer people would know about it.
No, that's right. Which to the degree that people think that they're in the tank to Biden, and they do certainly seem to tilt liberal, it has backfired, because I agree. It has created not just the story about the story, but the story about how big media giants are handling it.
Right. It does not look like we're going to get coronavirus financial relief happening before the election. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says he doesn't see it happening. Are you surprised something just bipartisan didn't get worked out, or that the president didn't push it harder just to help re-election, if nothing else?
Yeah, I am. And the problem is that, I think that the Nancy Pelosi, and they passed a $3 trillion bill in May, and I think she never felt a lot of pressure to come up with a deal or to make a deal because of the fact that the Republicans were in such disarray. The president refused to negotiate. I think he could have made it a lot harder for Democrats to stonewall if he had called everybody into the White House. Let's have a summit meeting, and Pelosi and Schumer and McConnell and Mnuchin and all of those people. He never did that. And in fact, it was just tremendous disarray on the Republican side. I mean, right now, you've got the president saying, let's go big. Let's go even bigger than the $2 trillion Nancy Pelosi is talking about. Well, at the same time, you have the Republican senators saying, we want it to be under $1 trillion. We want it to be $400 or $500 billion, and calling out Mitch McConnell. So I think it's been easy for Nancy Pelosi to stonewall and forget the question of COVID relief as, we're going to pass a bill. I think it ultimately ends up hurting the president, because he either, he's boosted or hurt by the state of the economy, and to the degree that you're not getting, and now it would be too late anyway, but for the election, but the fact that you're not getting $2 trillion of stimulus or $1.5 trillion of stimulus in the economy a month ago probably hurts the economy and makes people feel less content with where things are right now, which probably never helps the incumbent.
New coronavirus restrictions are in effect in France and England now. No indoor gatherings of people you don't live with in London. Do you think the barn door is just ripped off the hinges here, though? Like, no matter how bad this late fall and winter might be, it's just going to be more openings no matter what?
Well, no. I mean, I do think it's going to take a lot for you to see restrictions, but we are seeing restrictions. You're seeing them in New York State. You're seeing some in Wisconsin. You know, I think, are we going to see a national shutdown? I think that's really hard to see that happening because, you know, too many people just won't accept it. It won't abide by it. But could you see more isolated restrictions in a bunch of places? You know, I think it all depends on the state of the virus. And, you know, look, I'd like the darn thing to go away tomorrow. But as I've said all along in our conversations, Chris, you got to follow the science. And if the science says there's been a huge new outbreak and, you know, God forbid, a new strain of the virus or whatever, you got to do what needs to be done to keep people safe. So I hope it doesn't come to that, and I think it would be harder for it to come to that now than it was in March after what happened in March, but I'm never going to say never.
One more, Chris. Anything strike you from the Amy Coney Barrett hearings? Anything from her testimony, anything from the questioning? I mean, safe to say it was certainly a lot quieter than Brett Kavanaugh's a couple of years ago.
Well, I think she did a good job. She's going to be confirmed. It seemed to me that the Democrats kind of knew that going in, and they seemed less interested in trying to disqualify her, which I don't think they could have done anyway, and more interested in scoring political points for the election. And, you know, the best issue for Democrats in 2018 in the midterms was health care. And they really focused on health care. I mean, we've had more talk about health care and pre-existing conditions and 26-year-old and their parents' policies this week than we've had in the last, maybe the whole campaign. And, you know, I think that could be effective in raising that as an issue again for people. But in terms of Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation to the court, unless something completely unforeseen happens, she'll be Justice Barrett before Election Day.
Yeah. Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday, a frequent guest here on the Fox News Rundown. Chris, thanks a lot.
You bet. Thank you, Chris.
It's the latest from Fox News Podcasts, The Campaign with Bret Baier, with updates from reporters on the trail and in-studio experts. Bret keeps you informed on the 2020 race. Go to foxnewspodcast.com and download The Campaign with Bret Baier now.
And now, some good news with Tonya J. Powers.
Hundreds of Florida students are not only learning about space, but they'll soon have their own souvenir from it. Postcards made by students at River City Science Academy in Jacksonville will be included in an upcoming rocket launch. The assignment was to answer the question, why do you think the Earth needs space? Jace is a fifth grader who told Jacksonville's Action News Jax TV the answer that inspired his drawing.
I drew a spacesuit that can go to different planets.
Morgan Galena is a teacher at River City Science Academy and worked on the project with the kids.
It's a very open-ended, like, what could we eventually do in space? What could we use space for?
The postcards will be launched into outer space aboard the New Shepard, part of Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' rocket company. The New Shepard is named for Mercury astronaut Alan Shepard, and it makes 11-minute trips to space from its launch pad in Texas. It's all part of the Earth Needs Space project for the Club for the Future, which is Blue Origin's nonprofit organization. Galena says it's a project with an eye toward the future.
This can be a career that they can eventually go into, something with space.
Each postcard will be given back to the students with a flown from space stamp.
Excited to get it back. It's going to be really cool.
If you'd like to know more about how to send postcards into space, go to clubforfuture.org. Tonya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Jimmy Failla.
What's on your mind?
President Trump has been calling Joe Biden the pro-lockdown candidate for this entire food fight of a campaign. But you don't need the president's words to believe it. Just look at the former VP's campaign schedule. The Biden team has called a lid on public appearances 4 times in the past week before 10 o'clock in the morning. Folks, we're less than 3 weeks from a presidential election, and Biden isn't exactly fighting to the death. If anything, he's fighting till the nap. Most people listening to this right now have campaigned harder to be president of their fantasy football league than Joe has to be president of the United States. Which begs the question, how can the rest of us ever expect to get out of our houses if we elect the guy who barely leaves his? Seriously, Congress is fighting over a $2 trillion stimulus bill, but there could be no greater form of stimulus than letting everyone go back to work safely. Unfortunately, Democratic leaders just won't let us do it. Biden reminds us at every turn he sees the election as a choice between Park Avenue and Main Street. In his framing, the president somehow prioritizes the Park Avenue crowd, despite the fact that over 90% of actual Park Avenue residents donated to Democratic campaigns in the past year. But my thing is, if you're going to claim to be the party of Main Street, it would help to acknowledge just how many main streets are getting decimated by the ongoing economic shutdowns in Democrat-run states. In New York alone, it's believed that 50% of the bars and restaurants that closed down during the lockdowns will never reopen. Folks, do you know how hard it is to go broke selling alcohol in a town with 2 football teams as bad as the Jets and Giants? Although, to be fair, most fans have probably moved on to stronger stuff at this point. Democrats have also failed to grasp exactly what the World Health Organization reported this week. Negative economic realities caused by shutdowns have led to a host of dire health consequences, such as a higher rate of suicide, substance abuse, and domestic abuse. The more you examine the lockdown issue, the more you realize Democrats have never been the party of science so much as the party of bash whatever Trump says because we've got an election to win. For all their criticisms of Trump's pandemic response, Biden and the Democrats have yet to explain how they'd do anything differently. You know, Joe likes to point out that he issued a plan for combating the virus on March 9th. And yeah, that's true, but the plan came 6 weeks after the president acted by banning incoming flights from China. A move Dr. Fauci testified under oath had saved thousands of lives, a move Biden criticized at the time as xenophobic. As for the specifics, Joe's plan called for, quote, a decisive public health response that involves widely available testing, developing a vaccine, and the distribution of critical medical supplies. If it sounds familiar, it's because these are all things the president has already done. Folks, we lead the world in testing. We thankfully suffer no shortage of supplies. And as you read this, we have 6 private companies in the home stretch of developing a vaccine. So for my money, I say Congress should stop fighting over a stimulus bill like they're the Real Housewives of New Jersey and let people get back to work. Because the truth is, Americans don't want more government handouts. They want the dignity of a job, which they can't get if Biden and the Democrats continue to push lockdowns for political purposes. Joe Biden likes to claim he's the candidate of the working class because he's traveled over 2 million miles by train during his career. But under his pro-lockdown policies, it's the working class that's getting railroaded. Open it all up now. And be sure to listen to me, Jimmy Failla, host Fox Across America, weekdays from noon to 3 on FoxNewsRadio.com.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at FoxNewsPodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to FoxNews.com. From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Stay on top of the latest news and information from Fox News. Listen and download the Fox News Hourly Update on your time. The trending stories you need anytime you want it. Listen and download now by going to FoxNewsPodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.